Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Gekkan Shoujo Nozaki-Kun, Episode 1, This Love, is being turned into a shoujo manga. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happens within this episode. So the episode starts with one of our main characters, Chio, wanting to confess her love to Nozaki, whom she's had a crush on for quite some time. However, as she's speaking to him, she starts to lose her nerve and internally panic, and this leads her to, instead of saying that she loves him, confess to being his fan. And then to her surprise, he gives her an autograph of a different name. And then she's a bit shocked, but she doesn't let it bring her down. She decides to try one more time, and she says that she's always wanted to be with him, and he decides to invite her over to his house. And she goes along with it, and then when she's at his house, she's like, I've never been to Bowie's house before. Maybe I shouldn't have come to a random boy's house. Maybe I should have put a little more thought into that. But she's already there, and if she leaves, another girl might go to his house, and that would be terrible because she likes him so much. And then, he then sets her up to do the beta on his manga, which is basically filling in the parts that are meant to be black with like black ink. And so she starts filling in the beta, and after a few hours, she then suddenly realizes that he's a manga artist, or mangaka as they are called too, and is shocked by that, and he's like, I'm surprised after 4 hours you're only just figuring that out. She then goes home, kind of lost in thought, before she takes another look at the autograph and realizes that the autograph for Yumino Sakiko is a name that she recognizes. She runs inside, goes to her shelf, pulls out the monthly Shoujo Girls magazine, flips to the manga, I believe it's called Let's Fall in Love, and realizes that that's the manga that he writes. The next day at school, she's brought the story and she's talking about how delicately the storyline unfolds. And then we see Nozaki killing a cockroach with a shoe. Then she talks about how like emotionally sensitive the story is, and then we see him very bluntly telling a girl her shirt's see-through and she should put on a jacket, which is quite funny. And obviously every time she makes a point of, you know, something that Let's Fall in Love is, he's basically doing the opposite in reality. And then later they're talking in the hall between classes about, her helping him out. And he talks about how he had given an interview in the magazine and how they'd given him bitter coffee and how the interviewer was rude because he expected a young girl. And he basically tells her, just because I'm young doesn't mean I'm a beautiful girl, which I thought was a hilarious line. And then he notes that he asks her about her art club that she had missed the day before because she went home with him, and she wonders why he knew that she was in a club, hoping that maybe he actually likes her too. And then he notes that he had had his eye on her for a while because she had colored in a poster with the art club, and he thought she would do good work. And that kind of disappoints her. Then they, of course, return. She returns to help him again at his house another time next in the episode, and there she's doing the beta and she's like reading the story as she does, and she asks him about how he's come to school beat up a few times, and he informs her that that's because he's a mangaka. Like he had, like patches for his stiff shoulders, stiff neck, his wrist and such. And she is relieved because she had thought he was secretly a thug, which honestly, she says she has like a huge crush on him, and yet she thought he was a thug. But besides the point, um, they then explore how that would look in shoujo manga if he was to add a plot like that to his story. But it is revealed that within shoujo manga, apparently if it's against the law in real life, you can still get in trouble for it if you're breaking the law in the manga, so you can't do that. And therefore, if he did have secretly a thug character, they'd have to replace like alcohol with juice and cigarettes with chocolate. And then it kind of loses its whole rebellious sideline because it just looks like friends hanging out. And then she comments on how the story that he's telling, the male character Suzuki has a bike, Mamiko the female character does not, and she asks if, because they're the romantic pairing, if they're gonna like romantically share a bike on the way home. But he tells her that can't happen because it's against traffic laws. Then the next day at school, he invites her to go home with him, and she obviously jumps at the chance because she really, really, really likes him. And then when she gets outside, she finds a double bike. And he basically tests various ways of riding the bike to see if any of them would work in the manga because a double bike would be legal versus, her trying to hold on to a single person's bike. But of course, none of the ways to ride the bike are romantic at all. And so that idea is scrapped. And instead, the two characters just end up walking home together. And the manga ends up being romantic, even though now that she knows how it got there, she's seeing like kind of both sides of it. Then we have the episode coming to a close where she's walking to school. She's almost late. She sees Nozaki. There's a cat in a tree. The cat jumps out of the tree and ends up landing on his face. He then picks up the cat, puts it on top of the wall, and as he picks up the cat, we get a flashback to supposedly Chio's fall in love moment with Nozaki, where he had actually lifted her up onto a wall, it looks like, just like he was doing to the cat. And then when she comes out of her daydream, flashback, there's now a whole group of cats that all jump on him, and she decides that she, now knowing him better, is going to try one more time to confess to him. And so she goes up to him, and she stutters and she stumbles, and then she says she's his fan, and he's like, yep, I know. And he writes her another autograph, this time saying, let's continue to work well together. And she basically despairs that, she's got a second autograph and tries to sound like she's happy about that. We then go into the credits, and then there's a post-credits scene where Nozaki informs her that another character or another person from school is going to be joining them in the afternoon to work on the manga, but that it's another boy, and asks her if that's okay. She asks who it is, and he reveals that it's Mikoshiba, who is, delicate and sensitive, etc., and that in his heart he calls him Mikorin or Mikorin. And then she meets Mikoshiba, and he does not come off that way to her, but that is where it says that is the end of the episode. Oh my gosh. So now that we've been reminded about what happened within the episode, it's now time to rank the episode. On this channel, we standardly will rank each series on two lists, a mostly objective ranking list, which uses set values of key storytelling elements to determine an objective score without emotion for the episode. And then also a personal list, which is where the emotion comes into it, and the score is simply based on entertainment value. All right, so we'll start with the mostly objective rank values, and I highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. So to start, there was manga supporting character introductions. In this case, Mamiko's voiceover and Saburo Suzuki's voiceovers. In this series, Nozaki is a mangaka. He makes a manga, and to illustrate points or to give ideas or as the jump off to whatever scenario the characters are getting in, it often jumps off from the manga that he's writing. either trying to find ideas for a special issue of it or the story of it, or as a result of it, etc., etc. As such, it shows like the pages of the manga at certain times throughout the episode, and the voices of the characters are voice-overed for the drawings. Now, they're not traditional characters in that like they're actually moving around in the anime. They are still manga characters within the anime, but because they do get a voiceover and they are key to a lot of the plots, or at least the catalyst to a lot of the plots, I'm counting them as characters, though they're only going to be worth 1 point. And that's 1 point each, so that brings us to a 2 so far for the episode. Our next positive points are premise establishment, which is basically free points for the first episode because it is usually the first episode that is going to be establishing the premise for the series. And in this case, the series, as I mentioned, is essentially Chio having a crush on Nozaki-kun but not being able to confess her feelings, and therefore working with him and being friend-zoned by him while getting into comedic scenarios stemming from their work on the mango, not the mango, the manga that Nozaki writes. And throughout the episodes and the series overall, they will gather together a collection of a friend group where they'll have various scenarios for each of them, and each of them have a different role in helping Nozaki with his manga, or is the love interest who is unaware of the manga work. Now, that being said, with the way that the series is set up, both in its manga form and in this anime form that we're rewatching and ranking, a lot of the episodes and scenarios, while they do follow a chronological order, a lot of them also could stand alone. There's very little references to previous episodes, and there's very little growth and of relationships and of characters, as each little snippet and episode is kind of designed that it could stand on its own, not necessarily like a traditional drama where like each thing that happened in the previous episode would impact future episodes and you have like actual relationship growth week to week of new milestones, things like that. But each of the characters do tend to have their pairing minus a couple, but for the most part there's typically a pairing, a character connected to Nozaki, and then, whoever their potential love interest is, though a lot of those romances do stay very surface, shallow level, kind of schoolyard crush, not actually like any serious type of relationship, which is part of like that premise and also how Chio's confessions keep failing. But having said that, a lot of times on my mostly objective rank values, I will have things like the main relationship or supporting relationship developments and regressions. However, with this series, I probably will not be using those, even though you can see them on the chart, simply because it is highly unlikely that they would be useful, because any relationship development that happens in an episode most likely won't even be mentioned in the next one. And then that's automatically a regression, or they have progress and regression within the same episode. Like, for example, in this episode, you would have had progress in that Chio tried to confess, and then regression because she failed. And it just doesn't feel like with this, because they're going to be so shallow and surface levels, I probably won't be using those particular values throughout this series, even though they technically could apply. But we've gotten a bit off track there. So, anyways, we established the premise, kooky little stories, or comedic little stories, surrounding this group of friends connected to Nozaki, who has a running series in a monthly girls magazine, and they help him out and then get into various scenarios prompted by him trying to come up with ideas for his manga. 3 points. That brings us now to 5 points overall. And then the final positives for this episode are 4 points each for our multi-episode main character introductions. And this, of course, is Chiyo Sakura and Umetaro Nozaki. I do also want to honorably mention that in the post-credits scene, Mikoshiba is introduced. Well, not introduced, but kind of teased as being a character. Nozaki asked Sakura if she would be okay with another person joining them to work on the manga, as Mikoshiba has been helping him for some time. And we do see the character briefly at the end, but one, because it's a post-credit scene, and two, because the appearance is so brief, I am considering that teasing the character for the next episode, not actually introducing it, which is why I have not given any points for Mikoshiba's introduction, though he was there. I want to honorably mention that. So, having said all that, our points for this episode were totaled 13, as there were no negatives, in my opinion, for this episode. That means, as the maximum score we can achieve per episode is 10, that this is a 10 out of 10 episode. So as to our season 1 ranking so far, on our mostly objective ranking, we have all of one episode because this is the first episode of the series. Therefore, in first place, we have This Love, ... is being turned into a shoujo manga. So for my personal opinion, I think that this was a very good introduction to the series. I like that they started with just the main two characters, Chiyo and Nozaki, or Sakura and Nozaki, as they are very much the center, as I believe they do appear in pretty much every episode and are part of most of the storylines, especially Nozaki. But then the story is kind of told through Sakura's point of view, and her world kind of revolves around Nozaki. So I think for establishing that premise, it's a very good episode. As far as the comedic factor, it ultimately, I feel, is a comedy series, and there were several instances of really good comedy throughout the episode. There was obviously the trying to confess your love and getting an autograph comedy, there was the bike comedy, there was him talking about his interviews comedy, there was the comedy with the cats at the end. There were several points throughout the series where I laughed out loud in this episode. Not so much throughout the series. But having said that, I do also think, now this is a personal opinion, but this is the personal parts, that's why I get to say it. At the start of the episode, Chiyo obviously has not actually had much contact with Nozaki. She's basically approaching him after an interaction that they had in the past, and she's been harboring this crush, and she wants to confess her feelings to him. And she, of course, starts, but then she panics internally and chickens out, and instead says that she's his fan and gets her autograph. But, and that's fine to me. But then so for me, I would say the biggest fear when you're confessing your feelings or trying to ask somebody out is the fear not just of rejection, but of how you will be rejected and how harsh maybe you would be rejected. So in the first episode, like in the first part of the episode, she doesn't know really anything about him other than that he helped her once. like they don't have any bond or connection or knowledge of each other beyond that. So honestly, she is very much in the dark about how he might react to it. So her being afraid and having that panic and chickening out makes sense. Even throughout the episode when she's helping him with his manga, he he notes that he hasn't even had his first love yet, and he asks her about, like whether she has, and she basically tells him about himself, like her view of him, and even he's sitting there like, he doesn't sound like a great guy, and she just kind of has to laugh it off. But like the fact is at the start, she knew nothing about him really. She didn't know that he was a manga artist. She didn't know about his personality. She knew nothing other than that he helped her once. And honestly, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine with anime in general is how quickly these girls seem to fall in love for the most ordinary acts of kindness, and then they're like all in forever no matter how things play out after that with the character. They were nice to me one singular time. Oh my gosh, I have to be like devoted to them forever. And it's like, you really don't. But in this case, in this series, it's a very lighthearted series. So some of them can get dark, but this one doesn't. So that's just a general pet peeve for the trope. By the end of the episode, they've spent time together now. She knows more about his personality. She knows how he behaves. She's been to his house. They've had comfortable conversations. She knows now more about him. So I don't understand why she's still so afraid to confess her feelings. The worst that he would do by this point, it's been established like the type of character he has, the worst he would do is say no, that he doesn't feel the same or something. And that's not like that will hurt, but it's not scary. It's not like he's going to be unkind about it. It's not like he's going to be harsh. It's not like he's going to laugh in her face. It's not like he's going to go around and tell everybody all the time. Like some of the worst case scenarios that you might fear when being rejected by somebody, especially at that age, you kind of have established at this point he's not going to do any of those things. So I don't understand where her fear is coming from. And again, the worst he could say is no. So I don't really understand why the second time she chickens out. And maybe it was just too soon for her to try again, but maybe some self-reflection that is needed to determine whether or not she is ready or not, before you just like jump into it. Because now she has two autographs, and what's she gonna do with those? Sell one? Or no, knowing her, she'll keep them in a shrine. Anywho, the point is that kind of second confession and like I said, I've explained my personal reasonings. I didn't really enjoy that. I would rather she just not have tried again or waited until she was actually ready to follow through rather than chickening out a second time. Though I will note that I did also think that it was a funny to kind of come full circle in the episode to end where it began. That is funny, but at the same time, I don't know what she's so scared of at this point. Like, they're working together. They know each other at this point. Maybe not like super well, but at least well enough that she would know he wouldn't do anything cruel if he didn't have the same feelings that she does. And rather than hanging on, if she was rejected, she would then have the chance to move on rather than holding on to this crush, the maybe it'll be reciprocated someday, blah, blah, blah. And if she's waiting for him to make a move, he's way too oblivious for that. And we've already seen that that was the case. But that would be personally my one negative to the episode. Otherwise, I enjoyed it immensely. And that is why I decided to rank it personally as an 8 out of 10. Because there is room for improvement, but it was a very strong episode. So because this is the first episode within the series, it is, of course, in first place. This love, ... is being turned into a shoujo manga. And now we're coming to our series ranking so far. Now with this series, there is only one season, which is 12 episodes long. There is no season 2. However, there are a set of special episodes, 6 special episodes, And as I didn't feel that it would be fair to rank like the 4-minute little special episodes against the full-length 12 actual series episodes, we will be ranking them separately, but we will get a percentage for both and see which are better ultimately, the season 1 true episodes or the specials. And as such, our series rankings so far are mostly objective. We have 10 out of 120 for season 1 so far, and on the personal side, 8 out of 120 for season 1. With that, we've now rewatched and ranked Gekkan Shoujo Nozaki-Kun episode 1, This Love, ... is being turned into a shoujo manga. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.